We've had lots of really interesting ideas today about discovering things, about figuring out how to do something that has not done before, kind of building new products and things like that. And I want to start off with kind of something a bit kind of counter to that. Arthur Schopenhauer, the kind of great German philosopher, has this kind of thing that I'm going to read out in German because I can shout in German in late evening and wake up everybody. He says, daher ist die Aufgabe nicht sowohl zu sehen, noch sie keine gesehen hat, als bei dem jederseits zu denken, was noch keiner gedacht. So, for people that don't know German like I don't, I have no fucking clue what this means. The kind of rough English translation is that when we're looking at new things, when we're trying to do discovery, philosophic discovery, product discovery, and things like that, the problem is not kind of to be completely like, oh, nobody ever thought about this. Everybody wants to be a genius. But the great discoveries comes from kind of thinking about kind of something that everybody sees in a different way. Something that kind of, it's out there, everybody's looking at it, but you can look at it from a different perspective. And one of the things I want to kind of start looking from a different perspective, and I would recommend you do as well, and that kind of really last couple of years have gotten me to think very, very hard about something that I've been watching for 20 years, but in a completely different viewpoint and from completely different eyes, is kind of this shit that you've seen at 1 million conferences so far. It opens every conference for the last 10 years. It's kind of, this. So kind of basically we had these kind of 4 rules, 4 principles that everybody's been looking at for the last 20 years, and looking at responding to change. That's always good because we want to be responsive and we want to adapt and things like that. And all of this stuff kind of is really good, but I think from today's perspective, at least maybe this was the original perspective that people who were smart invented it. I was just too stupid to understand it back then. I'm thinking about completely different types of change now, completely different types of customers, completely different definition of working software. And when we're looking at interactions that we follow, completely different interactions than the ones I thought when I originally read this. And that's kind of something I want to kind of challenge you to think about a bit. For example, when we're looking at like responding to change and customer collaboration, most people talk about responding to the changing plans that the stakeholders are providing and collaborating with stakeholders in the company, collaborating with people who kind of give you demands and things like that. There was a gaming company called Ludocraft in 2004. They created a new game called Neverending, and the game kind of, as they were building it, started becoming relatively popular. It was a massive multiplayer online game. 2004, these were popular back then. And they kind of built up these things to keep people engaged in the game, to build this massive multiplayer thing, to build it up. And one of the things they built was a way for people to chat within the game. And then they built a way for people to kind of take screenshots of the game and share interesting screenshots with other players. And a bit later, they realized that more people are actually sitting in the chat rooms than playing the game, which is unexpected. And they realized that they're not sharing the screenshots from the game, they're sharing kind of random photos. And they're discussing it, they're laughing about it, and it turns out that actually kind of what the stakeholders wanted and where the game was going was exactly opposite of what the kind of people who are paying for the game wanted. And then who's the customer here? And they were smart enough to basically throw away the game and build a photo sharing platform. And that's Flickr for you. They sold it to I don't know how many billions to Yahoo later. Because they figured out what type of change they actually want to respond to. And we can kind of, there's a million stories about this in software, and everybody talks about how you can do this in software, you can't do this for, other things because large companies can't do that and things like that. One of the most interesting books I've read about this recently, and I would strongly recommend people reading that, is called The Startup Factory. It's about Haier, the Chinese white appliance manufacturer. They build house appliances like fridges and washing machines and things like that. And from an almost unknown company 30 years ago, they've emerged to be, I think, number 4 player worldwide now. They have, I don't know, tens of thousands of employees. And in Europe, they are, I think, not competing under their own brand. They bought Candy, they bought General Electric appliances, so they're just buying these brands now that are more familiar. So one of the kind of really, really strict policies that the owner of the main director of the company who created this process introduced is called zero distance to customer. So Victor this morning was talking about getting closer to the customer, observing the customer, understanding the customer. These people are talking about like zero distance, just delete all the layers between people doing the work and the customers. And there's a couple of fantastic stories in the book. It's called Randy High Model and the End of Management as we know it. It's a wonderful book. One of the stories that really stuck with me is when they had these kind of people who were servicing washing machines, try to kind of reduce the distance between them and the customers because there was some problem with some specific type of washing machine in a very specific region of China. And they couldn't understand why. People were returning these washing machines a lot more than everywhere else. So first they thought it was a logistics problem. The machines are being broken in the transport because of who knows what. And then when they get to the point where they're no longer working, no, that wasn't the issue. Then they thought, well, maybe it's a manufacturing problem from this specific plant that's servicing that region. They investigated that. Nope, that was fine as well. And then they actually sent people there to try to, in the service centers where people are bringing the machines back, try and figure out what went wrong. And, bit by bit, they kind of figured out some patterns that were interesting, and most people bringing the machines back were farmers. Just kind of curious, and then they started talking to farmers what they use these machines for, and it turns out that this specific washing machine, on some specific program for washing, is really good for washing potatoes. Because it doesn't damage the potatoes too much, but the potatoes become cleaner, so they look nicer when you're in the market stall. Plus, they, attract a bit of water, so they're heavier, so you can sell it for more money. So I have no idea how. It doesn't really matter. One peasant somewhere in China figured that out. He told his friend, the friend told their friends, and kind of slowly all the farmers in this region of China were buying this washing machine to wash potatoes. Because it wasn't designed to wash potatoes, there were kind of residue breaking the machine and things like that. A month later, these people had a washing machine with a program to wash potatoes on the market. Hardware appliances distributed, built, designed for a purpose that nobody has before seen. Everybody was watching it, nobody's before seen. So kind of, we can do this and we should be doing this a lot more in our companies. Rachel Newman, who was the head of product at Eventbrite, the kind of event management platform, again, they're a massive software company, had this wonderful fireside chat video. I will kind of put the link here. You can take a photo of it, watch the video, or we can send it to you later, where she said basically that at Eventbrite, they concluded that they have these kind of customer service people that are talking to users all day long. They have hundreds of thousands of data points about people's problems that are ignored. People call, the customer service people solve their problem, they go away, or they apologize, they go away, and nobody's mining this data. We have this data there. Everybody's seeing that data, people are not thinking about it the way they should. And Rachel basically introduced this role in Eventbrite for people to bridge product management and customer servicing so they can mine this data more effectively and come up with ideas for products and build the products. And we can do this at scale with software, of course, and we, people getting in trouble and figuring out how we spot that is not an issue at all. For example, I have this product I've been working on for the last couple of years, and I tend to log when people get in trouble. So here's a screenshot from one of these logs that we've recently been working on. This is people trying to register. There's somebody at gmail.com, then gmail.com, then gamil.com, then gamali.com. These are people who don't know how to type their own email address. These are people who are getting in trouble. Now, the question is, what do we do with this? Do we do anything with this? What should we do with this? Should we mine this for some information to understand that our product has a UX problem? Or do we just kind of ignore it completely? So this kind of brings me back to the other issue with kind of the 4 principles we were looking at. When we talk about individuals and interactions, we often talked about individuals and interactions within the team, within the kind of group of people building the software, between product management and testers and developers, but not people who don't know how to type in their email address. And kind of the other thing is, what is working software at this point? What does working software mean? I mean, should the software be allowing somebody to register with their gmail.com where we cannot reach them by email or not? And there's a like conflict of interest here. As a owner of this product, I don't want to have customers I cannot communicate with. It's pointless. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is this person pays and then the receipt doesn't go anywhere, they can't log in anymore, I need to return the money. So I don't want that. But at the same time, these people theoretically want to use my product. And we need to be able to figure out how to do that. So kind of going back to this, I think one of the things that starts happening here is a particular type of sandwich that I like to call a stupidity sandwich. And a stupidity sandwich happens in this situation where the users know what they're trying to do. Somebody's trying to register, they've mistyped their email. You know what the user is trying to do. The user is trying to register. I mean, I can see that gmail.com is Gmail. You know that, I know that, but the software is too stupid to understand that. And then the question is, should we kind of deal with this sandwich in some way or not? And a big part of discovery comes from situations like this. One of the things that kind of really becomes interesting here is, well, of course, I want to take these customers, why not? So what we did is we figured out how to kind of solve both problems. People want to register, I want to have them as customers, but I want to be able to reach them. So we're auto-correcting all these kind of mistakes to gmail.com. And we're logging when people don't, we're noticing new patterns and we're just correcting it. You can type in gmail.com, I will correct it to Gmail and register you. The software should be able to do that. It's kind of smart enough. No AI necessary, really. So kind of here we have a really interesting issue where the software itself is too stupid to do that. But when we hit situations like that, we do not say the software is too stupid. What we say is, well, the user is too stupid for our product. They don't know how to type in their email address. So be honest. How many people in this room have had a situation where you just thought the user is too stupid to use my product? So, I mean, okay, fair enough. We can deal with that. And sometimes, the product I built, I had 10 million users last year. When you have 10 million people, you get into kind of weird behaviors, even with kind of small percentages. So I still do all the support myself, and I get wonderful emails every day. This is an email I got a couple of months ago. It's in Arabic, but no way to understand this or read it. And I don't even need to read it because, again, patterns emerge. One week I just started getting random emails in random languages that are all similar. So the software does kind of text-to-speech voice conversions, and blah, 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 blah. He's talking about some names here that I concluded are voices. We have 860 voices on the platform. These voices do not exist. He's trying to use voices that don't exist. It doesn't matter completely because he's trying to use it on a page that doesn't exist. Now, what's happening here is ChatGPT is sending people to my product by hallucinating a URL that doesn't exist on my website. Where they click on a link, they get like a 404 page saying this page, there's nothing here. And then they try to follow instructions that ChatGPT gave them to, type in these voices somewhere on a 404 page. It doesn't work. And then they send me this email. Now, I mean, if there ever is a qualification somebody is too stupid to live, you go into ChatGPT and you believe everything it says. You click on a link that doesn't exist and you complain. But, I want to take their money, man. Why not? So the problem with something like this, and this has been going on for a very long time, is that there is a percentage of our users that are doing things we cannot explain. Whether we blame them for being too stupid or not, that's a totally different thing. There's a wonderful blog post by Scott Alexander who talked about this from a perspective of sociological research. He worked for this kind of research agency where they've done some demographics with some psychology research. So they would try to compare and see, what's going on, but they were leaving most of the demographics questions open-ended. So there was no drop-down for you to select your nationality. You had to enter your nationality, so they can keep kind of these things open. And he had these wonderful, bizarre answers where people were selecting American as a gender, which, okay, gender politics today are a bit complex. You have all these different genders, so why not American as well? But then they were selecting Martian as nationality. That's a bit extreme. I mean, Tesla still hasn't put man on the moon and things like that. So kind of, and he had this thing where basically he came up with about 4% of responses that you can just throw away because they make no sense. And then he ended up kind of finding this 4% in other places as well. And he found some research that basically says that 4% of Americans think that lizardmen rule America. And he came up with this idea that there is a lizardman constant. That basically means that 4% of the people in your population are going to do things you have no way of explaining. Now, the question is, do we want to kind of work with these people or not? Or do we want to do something else? And the interesting thing here is we can actually optimize the product to help these people, but there are a lot more interesting things to do with this. And that's what I want to talk about. So, okay, we looked at kind of, part of this are people that we can say are stupid. But who's been in a situation where the user was too smart for you? Oh, a few people. Okay, not as much as before. So occasionally this thing happens as well. It's completely the opposite of the user is too stupid. I was working, for example, on integration between a British gambling company and an American poker network. And the integration was a relatively simple screen. We still had traditional business analysts that analyzed the shit out of this. They produced something this thick with screenshots and rules and things like that. But basically what it was is people in England had money in pounds in a gambling account. And in order to play in this poker network, they had to transfer it into chips because the American poker network was dealing with chips in kind of dollars. So one chip was $1. You couldn't do half a chip. You couldn't do 0.73 of a chip. It was kind of, 1 cent. So basically we built a screen where you had pounds, you had dollars, you were transferring money between them, but you didn't see dollars, you saw chips. We had this one guy who kind of figured out something really interesting. So the exchange rate then was 0.54 pounds per dollar. So basically he took $1 cent and then kind of sent it back into 0.054 pounds, rounded to decimals was 1 penny. And then he took that 1 penny and transferred it back to dollars to get 2 cents. So who here works for a bank? Do we have people working for us? So we have so my friend, you're going to correct me now, but this is how inflation works, yeah? So, and now when we had this, everybody started blaming everybody. The business analysts were blaming testers for not testing this. Developers were blaming business analysts for being stupid and not kind of specifying how to do rounding. Testers were blaming developers for being ignorant. And everybody was blaming everybody else. But the company had to pay this guy £20,000 next morning because he wrote a robot. Before AI, wrote a robot to do this. Now the problem here was, who's responsible for this? Because the client was then blaming the software company, wanting kind of to sue us and things like that. And we had this kind of really, really interesting discussion about, well, what is a bug? What is a feature? This thing was specified as rounding. There were kind of examples how to round. We implemented it, and then people were claiming it's a bug. But it was done as you requested, and everybody approved this thing. And we had this kind of really interesting conversation there between us and the project manager and things like that. And the project manager came and said, you guys are putting too many things as bugs. So, well, they are bugs. I mean, this is a bug. It's No. I said, you don't understand. Like the only difference between a bug and a feature is who pays for it. If it's a feature, the client pays for it. If it's a bug, we pay for it. So from now on, everything is a feature. And this is where kind of I understood, like, I have this completely wrong idea about bugs and features. My brain was working that, bugs were wrong, features were right, but it's not. It's kind of economics. And again, it was something that she was seeing or I wasn't seeing and thinking about something that we were watching all the time. And once I kind of started noticing this, there were a couple of really interesting things where this thing opens up a really good discussion. For example, I used to work on a collaboration tool. We sold it to a private investor last year, so I'm no longer working on it. But before Corona, before kind of working from home and things like that, we had this kind of really, really interesting bug report from a user. And she wrote us an email saying, your software is completely broken this morning. So, well, I looked at it and checked it. Seems okay. Maybe there's a network connection problem or something. No, your software is completely broken this morning. I said, well, I mean, are you using it in any kind of different way than before? What are you doing? He said, well, yeah, it doesn't work on my fridge. It's like, what? How do you even use it? I mean, the software, why would you like put it in a fridge? Is it like, getting too hot? Is it like, there's juices everywhere, there's fruit, what's going on? I mean, it's not supposed to be used like that. And it turns out that kind of she was a busy mother. In the morning, she was like preparing kids for school and participating in a meeting they were doing over our software. She wasn't directly contributing to the meeting, but she wanted to observe what was going on. And for that purpose, I mean, she tried to look at it on a laptop, but there's like milk everywhere, not a safe thing to do with the laptop. She tried to watch it on a mobile phone, very small screen, you can't see it, but she had this massive screen on a fridge. And she thought, I'm going to put it on a fridge and then reported the bug report. Well, I mean, I've never intended my software to be used on fridges, but okay. And then we started thinking about this, well, maybe supporting it for a fridge is just the wrong thing to do. But supporting this use case where people are observing a meeting, why not? I mean, our software was completely built for keyboards, mouses, for input. And why not just observe the meeting without an input? And then we optimized the user interface for that case. And it turns out that was really, really useful when Corona came because people were working from home. And the software usage jumped quite a lot. So kind of one of the things that I want to kind of plant in your heads is that, there's no like moral judgment on what's a bug, what's a feature, is it right or wrong or something like that. But we can talk about expected versus unexpected. And we can talk about that, features are things that people expect and bugs are things that people necessarily do not expect. But immediately when we start talking about expected or unexpected, the question is who? Because I never expected my software to work on a fridge. She did. So we have this kind of quadrant here, and I'm going to kind of very lump people into kind of two groups. So there is do the users of the software expect it to work in this way? And do the makers of the software expect it to? I don't care if you're a tester, developer, product management, stakeholder, one group. And so we have this kind of thing where, if both are in agreement, that's an acceptable feature. If both are not expecting, that's clearly a bug. But there's these two other cases that are really interesting to think about. And Kat Holmes, who worked for Microsoft on their inclusive technology, said that basically this category here is often something where there's a wrong assumption from the people that are making the software about how the software will be used. And I never expected the software to be used without a keyboard, without a mouse on a fridge. Somebody else did. And that's kind of a wrong assumption. And these assumptions, she calls them mismatches. So there's a mismatch there between the user and the kind of product makers. And here we have exploits. People are using the software in a way that, we never expected, but they expect to do that and they're getting some value out of it. So in a sense, mismatches are really interesting because Kat talks about how sometimes mismatches are happening because of a situational thing. Like somebody's trying to use your software outside when it's really bright daylight, or we heard today, with sweaty fingers or fingers that are kind of moist or something like that, it just doesn't work, or with gloves, or there's a mismatch between their situation. Some people are kind of, stupid. So there's a mismatch between their intelligence and the level of intelligence required for the software to be used. And there's lots of these types of mismatches. And what's really, really kind of interesting here is from a discovery perspective, if you want to kind of think differently about something that everybody's seeing, then kind of mismatches and exploits are hidden product opportunities. That's one of the most important things kind of to think about. For example, there was a really interesting cryptographic library that a guy called Max Levchin built in '99. And he built this thing that was, he's a genius, so he built a incredibly optimized cryptographic library. Product looking for a solution. Now you have this incredibly optimized cryptographic library. What the fuck do you do with that? And he said, well, basically this is incredibly optimized, so it basically can run on low power processors. Other libraries have to run on much more powerful processors. We can do the same kind of quality of cryptography on low power processors. And he said, well, okay, what low power processors do people have? Well, they were carrying around these Palm Pilot devices. This was before iPhone, before kind of, So you had Palm Pilot devices with some screen. They were exciting, they were new. And they thought, well, we can run cryptography on that. Okay, so what do we encrypt? Well, you encrypt something you want to protect. Okay, but what do you protect on a Palm Pilot? And they said, well, people like protecting money. So why don't we encrypt money? And they came up with this idea that basically you will have a Palm Pilot and there will be some money encrypted on it. I'm going to have a Palm Pilot with some money encrypted on it, and then we bang it together and money jumps from one phone to another. Okay, it was a nice gimmick. They got some investment. They demonstrated it in a cafe in San Francisco to investors. They gave them some money. They transferred money from one Palm Pilot to another. It was amazing. But kind of there were a couple of problems with that. One problem with that is not a lot of people had Palm Pilots. And the other thing was that you had to be physically present to kind of bang the phones together. So they imagined like POS terminals and things like that. So you buy coffee by banging it on a shop's Palm Pilot and things like that. They actually had kind of this implemented through a mobile app. But it was so difficult to test and evolved that developers built a website just so they can test it. And in the words of Max Levchin documented in the book Founders at Work by Jessica Livingstone, the website was unsexy, uncool, and nobody expected anybody to use it. But they kind of published it live anyway, so you can transfer the money from a website to a Palm Pilot. And then people started exploiting it to transfer money from website to website rather than from website to Palm Pilot. And they were using it to kind of transfer money online for auctions and for sales and things like that. And these people fought it. The product management fought it because it wasn't delivering their KPIs. It wasn't delivering their objective of increasing the Palm Pilot app usage. It wasn't producing useful results in terms of metrics they were chasing and things like that. And they fought it all the way. They threatened to sue people who were using this for website-to-website transfers. They were kind of blocking the website usage and things like that. And then a year later, somebody looked at the numbers. And website-to-website transfers had 1.5 million active users. The Palm Pilot app had 12,000. They decided to shut down the Palm Pilot app, and that is PayPal today. So exploits are hidden product opportunities. Mismatches are hidden product opportunities. And the really interesting thing with something like that is if somebody's exploiting your product, or if somebody's kind of misusing your product, if somebody's struggling with your product, most of the difficult work to get that person to your product is already done. Marketing acquisitions, it's there. That person is interacting with your product. Now, the product can keep that person, or the product can tell that person to fuck off. And for most of what people in this room can do, most of the people in this room cannot influence marketing, messaging, sales, and things like that, but we can influence the product. And we can play in keeping that person interacting with the product and becoming a user, a customer, or something like that. Amy Gallo, writing for the Harvard Business Review years ago, did this research, not for software, but for kind of products in general. And she talked about how, yes, there's always this kind of tug of war. Should you invest in acquiring new users or retaining new users? And of course, before you have any customers, before you have any users, you have to acquire them. But very quickly after that, retention becomes a lot more effective. And she says, acquisition is always linear. You acquire one customer, you get one customer, but improving retention by 5% in her research can lead to profit increasing, totally disproportionately compared to acquisition. Because we're keeping people around for longer, they're spending more, they're using more, they're bringing their friends. And kind of one of the really interesting things that we can do with product discovery is the product can do this on its own. The product can't do marketing on its own, but it can do this on its own, and we can influence that. So, for example, this product I'm building, we started with a way for people to convert PowerPoints to videos and using text-to-speech. So you would basically do your slides, you would put the voiceover into the presenter notes, and it would use text-to-speech to create a video out of it. It was designed for people who are not video professionals, but they need a video. Most users are HR professionals, online educators, people who just need a kind of decent video from slides. Don't want to spend time on it. They maybe don't have good audio equipment. They're not good at recording the software, audio, or like my voice. I always sound like a Bond villain, or blackmailing somebody on the other end of the line. I can't shake this kind of accent, but why not have a nice, pleasant voice over my videos? So, I started building that, and then I had this kind of really weird bug report from a guy who complained that some audio tricks were not working the way he expected. Downloaded the PowerPoint was white, just blank completely. And I thought this was, there's some kind of problem with the conversion that we're doing. We're, not parsing the PowerPoint correctly. We're producing a blank video. And I started looking at what type of, are images being lost anywhere? Are we deleting stuff? What's going on? And I couldn't find anything. So I kind of pinged him and said, okay, I can solve this kind of audio problem. That's okay. But I think you have a bigger problem here. The video is coming out blank, like just, white and some audio over it. What program are you using? Sometimes people use LibreOffice or, some weird things, and then we can't read that properly. I said, well, Office 365 PowerPoint. And I said, oh, shit. And I spent about 2 days trying to figure out why this is not working, and then actually loaded it in Office 365 PowerPoint online, and it was white. And I said to him, like, well, sorry, I'm trying to load your PowerPoint in Office 365. The slides are all white. I mean, what's going on here? He said, yeah, there's no slides. Wait a minute, like you're paying me hundreds of dollars per month to like create white videos. And he said, yeah. What the fuck? And so it turns out that I've kind of optimized the text-to-speech tricks and audio tricks so much that it was worth for this guy to basically create a blank PowerPoint, add presenter notes, upload the whole thing, wait for the whole video to be made, then download the video, load it in a video editing tool, delete the visuals, take the audio, and then use it for something else. I'm like, but this is insane. This is like you're spending so much on this that, this is completely pointless. Plus, it's wasting my resources. Building videos is expensive. Like, I'm paying operational costs for this. If you just want the audio, like, I can give you a screen to upload the Word document. And it's like, oh! So I created a screen that basically can upload the Word document to it, gives him an audio. It's much cheaper for me. It's much faster for him. Amazing stuff. And I thought, well, I helped one guy. That's, why not? So it was an additional link on the website. About a month later, there were as many audios built as there were videos. And then there were twice as many audios built as there were videos. And then at some point, this is like a daily export from a few years ago. There were 264 videos built that day, 124K audio files. The product wasn't building videos. The product was in using all these kind of text-to-speech conversion tricks to get people to create nice audio files. And this is, I think, something that we should be doing more as an industry. I think everybody's going through these things where users do something stupid, unexpected, weird, like building a blank video or, mistyping an email or something like that. But the whole kind of interactions of, our predictive plans and the whole thing about figuring out, following the customer and collaborating with the customer, well, that can open completely new use cases. It's not just about optimizing a tiny piece of software to keep one user. It's about opening it up to a completely different class of users, like Flickr did with getting people who wanted to share photos but not play games, like PayPal did with people who wanted to use a website to transfer money, not use a app. And by doing this, we can significantly unlock growth. In kind of this period between when I started building this and between when the screenshot was taken, the usage of the website increased 500 times in a space of 11 months. That means that things that were like random, unique events that never happen started happening twice a day. And all sorts of weird things came up. So kind of in order to do this, there's a couple of steps that I recommend people take. And I think we can do this systematically. We don't have to fight this like PayPal management did, because everybody fights this. Product management fights something that doesn't deliver the KPIs, but we can kind of figure this out systematically. It's not pure luck. There is a systematic process behind it. So step number one in the systematic process is figure out when people are misusing your software. You can do this like Rachel Newman suggested, like bridging the gap between customer service people and the product developers. You can do this with kind of what I've done, logging it and things like that. There's a million ways you can do this, but figure out how to spot when people are misusing your software. Because that opens up all these kind of different insights that we have, and then we can think about something that everybody's seeing in a different way. So one of the ways I do that is, and that's something that you can do very easily with your product, is whenever people run into problems, store that information somewhere so you can mine it, like Rachel Newman said. Don't even have them call customer support. So for example, this is the screen that uploads a Word document. There's an upload file there. And when people select something that we don't support, they see an error message like they would see in every other software. Like, oh, you selected a PNG file, you tried to put it in a text-to-speech system. Idiot. How? Why? What did you expect it to do? But instead of just doing this and telling the user is stupid, it's also logging this as information for me. So I can now go through this and I can see kind of when people are doing weird things that I don't expect. I can look at patterns there. And for example, I have at least 100 people every day uploading APK files to the screen. APK is an Android package for an application. How and why they expect text-to-speech systems to read an Android application, I do not understand. There's probably a bunch of reasons here. There might be a mismatch, like, thick fingers on a small screen. They wanted to select a Word document. They selected an APK file by mistake. Or it might be malicious. They're trying to kind of, send this, and then it's the equivalent of throwing a USB stick outside of the company, hoping that somebody's going to plug it in. I don't know, but there's nothing I can do with this. But sometimes you find things you can do. And I had 50, 60 people per day uploading SRT files. SRT files are subtitles for videos. When you download the pirated video, you have a video as an MP4 file, but you also have an SRT that's kind of a subtitle track. And well, SRT files are text files. They're kind of basically a timestamp, a sentence, timestamp sentence, timestamp sentence. It's a text file. Why not just let it go through? Why am I blocking people doing this? And I added this to whitelisted extensions. Tomorrow morning, I got a complaint from a user saying, I uploaded an SRT file, your systems kind of doesn't work, I want my money back. I said, okay, but let's see what happened. And he said, well, it read out the timestamps. I said, well, it's a file that has timestamps. You uploaded the file with timestamps, it read out the timestamps. What did you expect? He said, well, I expected the audio to be synchronized with the timestamps. He said, that's an interesting thing. So I thought this is a weird, interesting technical problem to solve. When you speed up the audio or slow down the audio, kind of pitch changes, and there's some interesting shit there. I thought, well, I have an afternoon, let me play with this. And I spent 4 hours working on this. These are by far the most profitable 4 hours I've done in my life. It's a very, very tiny percentage of people who upload this. But a month later, a massive software company figured out that what they can do is they can take their existing videos they have for kind of product demos and take an audio track, run it through a translation tool, upload it to my software, get a synchronized voiceover track in a different language. And they wanted to convert 200,000 videos in 50 different languages. I made more money on that than on anything else in my life. So, and this is like one of these things where, you find a weird use case and then somebody says, oh, but that's like only 0.1% of our users. Like, let's not care about that. It might be a completely different use case from what you thought. Maybe it's worth supporting. So kind of step number 2 when you start doing this, because when you start doing this, you're going to get lots and lots of data, is to figure out the signal from the noise. There's going to be too much shit to look at, and we need to figure out which of these are worth supporting, which of these are not. And so kind of, we need to zoom in on one behavior change that we want to improve. I think kind of systematically, if you look at product development, focusing on one way of improving user behavior or one thing for a user is important, and then figuring out different ways we can do with that. So I was kind of looking at doing this, well, we are improving now user retention, or somebody was mentioning from this kind of gaming company where I think Krzysztof said we have kind of people who are, supporting people from kind of buying more or something like that. So one behavior you really want to focus on, and then figuring out which of these crazy things can unlock something in that behavior. For example, one of the things people started really struggling when kind of they started uploading Word documents like mad is they didn't understand the technology. Most of these voices were then trained to read one language. So you have a language that can only read Polish, or a voice that can only read English. People started putting Polish into English and getting weird results. Speaks like a really, really bad version of a Polish builder in England. Or even weirder cases, they started kind of getting English text and giving it to a Russian voice that cannot even read Latin. And they get a blank audio out, they complain. They want their money back and all these things. So I started kind of logging this first. And they were kind of weird and interesting things. So you have like, Charles, an English voice reading Cyrillic, Robo voice that's kind of an English language voice reading Bengali, I guess, or Hindi. Then Imran, that's an Arabic voice, can only read Arabic script, reading kind of, somebody's Latinized this. And just, but if you look at this, there's kind of, I can see this block, I can see this block, I can see this. There's a lot more Hindi stuff than anything else. So, well, maybe there's something we can do about this. We don't have to give people an error, they complain. And this really kind of relates to one other book that I strongly recommend people read called Badass by Katie Sierra. Katie talks about how basically, if you want to focus on retention, you have a very short span. She says 30 minutes. The product-led community talks about 5 minutes, where you can keep that user engaged. If the user can't do something useful in the first 30 minutes according to Katie, 5 minutes according to product-led community, they will drop off, they'll do something else. And she calls this thing kind of really, the danger zone, she calls it a suck zone, because when people interact with something new, first they suck with it. They don't know how to use it. And they feel bad because they don't know how to use it, and their kind of key feeling is, I hate this shit. And then there's a suck threshold that they cross when they can do the basics with your product. They don't have to do the most complicated, the most powerful thing in the world, but they can kind of do the basics. And if you can get people to cross this thing in the first 5 minutes, your product retention goes through the roof. If not, people will struggle. I got it down with that screen to about 30 seconds. And that led to incredible growth. But kind of, so then, people will go and again, Katie talks about lots of more interesting things in the book. You should read that. But kind of, we need to get people over this threshold. So step number 3 is really to systematically remove obstacles to user success. Our software is putting obstacles to people's success, into people's success path. It might be doing that intentionally, unintentionally, with missing features, or with more features. I kind of force people to make videos instead of making an audio file. That's an obstacle. I was rejecting invalid emails. That's an obstacle. We need to get people over this hurdle. So one of the things I started doing there is, well, you can't do proper language detection for everything, but like not 90%, but 50% of this was Hindi. And Hindi is a specific Unicode range. I can detect Hindi. or Bengali, or kind of, there's like 20 languages. They're all specific Unicode ranges. You can't, it's very difficult to detect a difference between Polish and English if you just look at the letters. But Polish and Hindi, absolutely. So I built this screen where basically a first pass is they said, well, the voice you selected can only read, this thing. It cannot read this. And then it says, well, actually, this looks like it's Bangla, so here are some Bangla voices. Just kind of click here to continue. And, usage started increasing and increasing and increasing. I started adding more languages, more detection. It turns out most Western languages you can detect by combinations of 3 letters. But it was all coming later. This was done in 10 minutes. And it could prove that it's working well. And it proved that it's working well because I was able to measure it. So one of the things I really suggest people do, and this is kind of, when you do something like this, you're dealing with lizards. You're dealing with people whose logic is different from yours. So the fact that you think this is going to solve a problem has no relation to whether it's going to solve a problem for them. Maybe they're going to keep clicking on this button like mad. Nobody knows. So you need to measure it. And especially you need to measure it because kind of we have data now that talks about how, and you had this phrase this morning for knowledge assumption. So another book that people should read is by Ron Kohavi called Trustworthy Online Experiments. Ron became famous by measuring the knowledge assumptions of Microsoft. He went around and looked at the PowerPoints that people are using to justify, some projects and stuff like that, and then measured a bit later whether the things that were promised in the PowerPoint actually came true. And his data was that basically only about 1/3 of things at Microsoft came true the way they were expected to come true. The rest was knowledge assumption. And then other people started sending him data. He became famous by publishing this paper, and he published a book a couple of years ago called Trustworthy Online Experiment. He has data from Microsoft, where it's about 30%. Bing, that's kind of a better optimized thing. It's a search engine. It's kind of smaller use cases. Only about 10 to 20% of changes to Bing actually deliver value they were supposed to deliver. Google, again, 10 to 20%. Most of the stuff just doesn't do stuff because it's already well optimized. It's an established product that already works well. And we keep changing it. So Slack is about 30%. He has data from Netflix, from a different book, referencing it, and it's about 10% early on. So most of the shit doesn't work. And that's even with kind of normal people. When you're dealing with lizards, it's even worse. So I started measuring this stuff, and actually kind of after doing the kind of, Hindi stuff, things started growing a bit. This is tasks per day, successful conversions. And then kind of a couple of days after I introduced the kind of Hindi language detection, it went like this. Like, woohoo! Times, this is like somewhere around less than 100. This is times 2. Amazing stuff. And I thought, well, I'm going to open up a champagne, but there's a law that Ron Kohavi talks about in his book called Twyman's Law. And he says that if any data looks too well or kind of too much out of proportion, it's probably wrong. So maybe my metrics are wrong. Maybe. No, this is a couple of years ago. This is from 3 years ago. So this is kind of, maybe the data is wrong. So I looked at the metrics. Am I collecting the right metrics? You talked about the meter and the scale and things like that. If you're looking at the wrong place, then, if the thermometer is outside, it doesn't matter how well it's adjusting the temperature here. So the metrics were fine. But one other thing that's really interesting when you start measuring if it's working is it doing anything else that people didn't expect? Again, are we, do we watch something and we're not seeing something that we should be seeing? And I really like a model from a book called Lean Analytics called The 5 Stages of Growth. They talk about how products go through 5 different stages. They optimize different things at different times. And I use it for kind of thinking about, well, we want to optimize this thing, but not damage this thing too much. We want to optimize revenue, but we don't want to damage marketing too much. Or we want to optimize scaling this or reducing operational costs, but I don't want to damage revenue. So this is kind of 5 stages where basically, again, you can look at the book and read about that in more detail, but they separate it in kind of empathy is the product solving a problem for people. Stickiness are people kind of interacting with the product frequently enough, urgently enough. Then kind of, they call this thing virality, but it's really about growth, audience growth and things like that. Are we making enough money and kind of, easy to optimize for scale. And their idea with this is that basically there's not much point optimizing how much money you get until you get people to stick around. There's not much point optimizing your kind of performance and reducing cost per transaction if nobody's using your system. And if you're not making enough money and things like that. But I use this model also when I'm measuring to say, is there something unexpected here? So we were measuring this thing and this thing, but I was also putting guardrails around these things. Are my operational costs jumping out of proportion? Is my revenue jumping out of proportion? It turns out that most of those people that were kind of interacting with the system on this graph were not paying anything at all. They were using the free tier to the maximum they can use, then dropping off. So, well, this is not good because if it continues like that, the operational costs are getting out of hand, the revenue is not that good. It's my money, the company is going to go bankrupt in about a month. So I started panicking. Now I have growth, but it's not the growth I want. Lizards are coming. And I looked at the data and like 99.9% of this was generating Hindi language content. I've optimized it too much. It was too easy to generate Hindi language content. So I panicked and I did something that I had to do to preserve revenue and scale. And I just blocked India completely from the site. And then the next day, something really interesting happened. Kind of this happened next day, kind of where it doubled again. And it was really weird because like 99% people from Poland were generating Hindi language audio. From San Marino, from Monaco, from Spain, and like all these users migrated immediately. And I realized, well, these people are, doing something weird, and actually found out what this was. Where kind of somewhere around here, when I optimized it, some guy really liked it, and he published a popular YouTube video in Hindi. He was showing people how to use my site and abuse the free tier. I couldn't understand anything, but somewhere halfway through the video, it says, VPN, 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 VPN. And like, these people are using VPNs. So instead of blocking India, like how, one third of the world's population now, what I did is I blocked VPNs. And this was a panic move because really I would be running out of, the company would go bankrupt like 2 weeks later after this. So I blocked VPNs. And it was a panic move. It was a really ugly way of blocking VPNs. When you come to the website, you would just get this ugly page, completely unstyled, that says, hey, your request was blocked. Thank you, no. Turn off the VPN. There's no legitimate use for you to use a VPN for text-to-speech. Just, And then this thing happened, so I solved the problem, basically. But I killed all the growth that I had, and the usage started declining. So that's not good as well. And what I'm trying to say is anything you do when you're following lizards is going to create unexpected impacts, or it might create unexpected impacts. And it's really useful to measure the shit out of this so that you can see and think about something that is there. The information is there for you, but you need to be able to see it and manage it. So that brings me to the last step of the process, and it's basically detect unintended impacts, because there's going to be a lot of this. Sometimes the unintended impacts are going to be in your favor, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you'll see, well, this is a completely new use case. We really want to support this. Sometimes it's going to be, oh shit, the company is going bankrupt if we don't do something about this. And one thing that kind of was really interesting is when I blocked VPNs, again, this is where I've realized, customer interactions, who's the customer, what are we doing, responding to change and things like that. I started getting hundreds of emails every day from people that were blocked. I got an email from an insurance company in India that was blocked because they're using VPNs for security and things like that. And I said, well, okay, it was critical for their business. They were complaining. They've been using the system for 3 years now. I need to restore it. And I said, well, what's your account name? He said, oh, we're using it for free. I said, no, you're not anymore. So we're not going to do that anymore. And I started getting these weird emails. This is one of the kind of best emails I got. He says, I not use VPN. I'm not a hacker or a spam or a robot. Like the best way to convince somebody that you're not a robot is to say, I'm not a robot. That's, and he says, I'm harassed by the policeman or military. He doesn't really know if it's police or military. Maybe they're using the same uniforms. And because he's very spiritual, he needs to use a VPN connection. Like, I started getting hundreds of emails like this every day. And the best emails were not even coming from legitimate email addresses. The best emails were coming from this kind of email masking software, where it comes from some, anonymous thing. You can't even reply to it. And I started getting like an email every hour with this subject, like, please restore my access from kind of some random Outlook address. I tried replying to this a few times, but it's the same pattern, like, please restore my access in the subject, nobody, just this sent from, mail from Windows, and coming. I tried to engage with this person a few times to see who they are, and like, this thing bounces when you send an email to it. Why would you send an email from an email that cannot receive emails? Like, it's insane. And then a week later, I got an email exactly like this from a Gmail address. I said, the first thing I wanted to say is like, stop sending me fucking emails. You're bombarding me with emails, But I said, well, we've blocked VPNs because of this and that, and that's kind of, sorry, we can't support that anymore. I had a like pre-recorded template for replying, and he said, that's fine, but I want my money back. You're blocking me from using the system I paid you, I want my money back. And I looked at, and this guy was kind of, a month before that gave me $500. I'm like, I'm not giving you $500 back, man. We need to solve this problem in a different way. And I've realized, okay, there are legitimate uses for VPNs that I don't know about. There are people who want to give me money to use this thing over VPN. Why would I reject that? I mean, it's something that, it's a change. It's a change to my plans. And Kati Sierra talks about this. There's a very, very important part of this. Now, I could have taken his IP address and whitelisted it. That's like a 2-minute change. No problem at all. But she talks about that's the wrong thing to do. Like, the wrong thing to do would be to kind of, support a specific fridge version for our software. And she says the right thing to do is basically to solve for one person, but to extend it for many people. So that you open up a new market for yourself. You open up a new channel. You use these things as insights, not as bugs to firefight, to kind of tweak the bug and hotfix and deploy, but use it as insight for product management so that you can extend it to many people, different use cases and things like that. So what I thought was, well, okay, I have this person, he wants to pay me to use it over a VPN. Why not? I have other people who want to abuse it. Absolutely not. So what I did is basically change this horrible screen that scares people off when they connect over a VPN. And I did a very quick check to see, is the person logged in? If the person is logged in with a commercial account, just let him use it. If the person is logged in without a commercial account or not logged in, they see a nice screen that basically says VPN access feature is only for commercial accounts. Here is how you can pay me. And kind of this screen then kind of at the end of February, this was kind of somewhere in the middle of February, at the end of February basically produced a 24% increase in revenue. This screen. Because there were people abusing the free tier, it was useful for them. It stopped being useful, and then they started upgrading. So, of course, you're not going to solve this thing for everybody, and you're not going to be able to support every crazy use case, and you shouldn't. A good product manager doesn't chase every kind of squirrel and every idea. And some of these people you will never kind of satisfy. The guy who was too spiritual to use the software came back a month later and sent me this email. I'm keeping it and I'm showing it in all my presentations as a kind of reminder that, sometimes you just can't help anybody, but the point is not to help these people. The point is basically to evolve your product so it becomes more useful for the majority of your users and to open new markets. So that's kind of pretty much it for what I had for today. The 4 steps, I think, they are important for systematically doing this kind of product management. Because everybody gets into these situations where something unexpected happens. You can fight it, you can ignore it, or you can use it for the benefit of your product. So the 4 steps are basically learn how people are misusing your product, zoom in on one behavior change, don't chase everything, figure out something systematically that contributes to your KPIs now, remove obstacles to user success, and detect unintended impacts. And you can kind of remember this by the starting letters RZRD, that's kind of lizard optimization. Or as Tomek said, there's a book I published, and you can kind of use a shorter version that's kind of lizard alert. Step number 2 is zoom in. Step number 3 is rescue the lizards when they get stuck. And step number 4 is double check that you've actually rescued them. Thank you very much. That's all I have for you today. Thank you.